In the hours after being sworn in, President Trump signed 42 executive orders on a wide range of issues. One of those includes immigration and birthright citizenship, which has now led to federal lawsuits being filed in multiple states, including here in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Constitutional law professor Daniel Pye from UNH Law School joins us live in the studio. And Daniel, birthright citizenship is protected by the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. So how likely is it that this executive order will in fact go into effect, and how could this unfold in the courts?
There's almost no chance that this could be ended by an executive order. There's a broad consensus that birthright citizenship is something that is guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, and so the only way to change that would be to amend the Constitution to change that.
And just walk us through what that would take to amend the Constitution. I mean, that is an act of Congress.
Right. So, well, it's not an act of Congress. An act of Congress is a law. Amending the Constitution requires first that Congress, by a supermajority, pass a change to the language of the Constitution. And then it has to be ratified by a majority of the states as well. And so the process is difficult to achieve, and it's very unlikely that the threshold could be met in the case of birthright citizenship.
And the president's orders changed several rules and regulations from the last administration. So what limits does the new administration have when it comes to areas that Congress has jurisdiction over?
Well, so if Congress has jurisdiction over it, then they can make, what you mean is that they have the power to regulate a thing. Then the president can, within the guidelines set by Congress, determine how the executive branch will carry out the law that Congress directs them to do. But broadly speaking, the president's executive authority is quite strong. I mean, he is the executive branch, really. And so if there's something within the discretion of the executive branch, something that is a power of the executive, then the president can just tell the officials within the executive branch how to behave, and they have to listen to him because he personifies that entire branch of government.
So for any executive order, if there's something signed that contradicts state laws, how would that be resolved?
So that's a little bit more complicated. So there is something in Article 6 called the Supremacy Clause, which means that which says that federal laws in general trump state laws. But it has to be something that the president has the power to do. So in other words, Article 2 of the Constitution has to give the president the power to do a thing. And then if there's a conflict with state laws, then the president wins. But if it's not something that is an Article 2 power, then the state law wins.
Daniel Pye with UNH Law School, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.